Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 3:30 to 4:30 session of the 2018 OpenSimulator Community Conference. As a reminder to our in-world and web audience, you can view the full conference schedule at conference.opensimulator.org and tweet your questions or comments to @OpenSimCC with the hashtag #OSCC18. This session, we are happy to introduce a terrific session called State of Immersion, Tales of the Front Line of Learning, Research, and Engagement. Our speakers today are Kavan Zanovka, Abacus Capellini, Barbara Truman, and yours truly, Cynthia Cologne. Kavan is an instructional designer and a PhD student at the University of Colorado, Denver. Abacus is a community college leader and PhD student at Old Dominion University. Barbara is a graduate faculty member and researcher at the University of Central Florida in Orlando, and Cynthia is a professor at Colorado Technical University. Welcome all. Let's begin the session. Over to you, Kay.
Okay, hey everybody. Thank you very much for coming and hopefully staying. This is going to be a little different, and the reason why is, first of all, when we were thinking about doing this to begin with, it was Cynthia, who said, we should do this through quantum storytelling. And then she sent us videos and links and articles to read. And I went, okay, we can do this. And then surprisingly, it was the same week in an actual critical theory class that I was taking that that my professor started talking about quantum storytelling. And that's really when, and we'll let Cynthia jump in whenever she wants to explain even further. But for me, and for what I started to see in my class, was that quantum storytelling was when a story couldn't go linear. And the PhD program I'm in is putting together critical studies and technology. So we're pulling a lot from urban education, and quantum storytelling is really showing up there for students who are, say, inner city kids, African American, Hispanic kids who might get bused to a school outside their normal district, and how they have to go through the different spaces, and how their stories aren't linear, and how they aren't as expected. So that's where we're going to get going there. So I'm going to ask my first question of you guys. So go ahead and type this. Anybody here remember Orientation Island in Second Life? And Chris, if you could go next slide, that'd be perfect. Okay, so what's up on this slide is really just what happened to me with one of my instructors when I was showing her how to use Second Life. I came into my office one day and there was a voicemail and it said, "Naked and alone on orientation." she said, and a pretty strong kind of woman, but still, the voicemail that I had was, "I am naked and alone on Orientation Island. Help me." Yes. And yes, this instructor, the reason why I brought it here for our Tales of Immersion, I think this was the first time I realized that people at my college were getting immersed in a virtual world. Because if she was not immersed in this world, I would not have gotten a voicemail after hours telling me that she was sunk in, that she took her avatar into the water because she suddenly took off all her clothes and she didn't know why. And the reason I'm bringing this part of the story up for immersion is because if she didn't have some feeling of attachment, if she didn't have some feeling of embodiment, if she didn't have some feeling that this was her, that this was an extension of her, or this was her, it would not have bothered her. I would not have gotten that voicemail. I wouldn't have had to work with her the next day to get her up out of the water and to get clothes onto her. and things like this. Yeah, Chris, it's okay to laugh. And Chris is in the Colorado with me, and he knows the person that this happened to, so that's probably why he's laughing also. And the thing of it is, I think we all kind of remember, we get attached to our avatars. We get immersed in these virtual worlds, and that's what we want to discuss today. And it's okay if you go past virtual worlds a little bit too, because I can tell you one of the projects I'm working for in my PhD program is actually on escape rooms, which are not in virtual worlds, but how our students are immersing themselves in the escape rooms, taking on the roles that we're telling them that they're supposed to take on, and how it's more than engagement. So that's how I wanted to start out this portion of us talking. And please put things in chat. We're really good at walking and chewing gum, all four of us. So we will reply to you. So go ahead. So what I wanted to say is I'm now going to send it over to Chris.
Sure. So one of the things I first thought about is, I'm sure many of you have the same issue, is when you try to start thinking about immersion and a story about immersion, it's like, well, which one? There's so many that are out there, so many different things that we tie into. So mine's going to be a little less linear which is really tough for me, because as those that know me know, I teach accounting, so there's rules and regulations for everything. So I'm going to go a little bit freestyle, I guess, on this one. So here is my story of immersion. Logging in provides a clean break. Dashboards and HUDs appear. Resing, waiting, adjusting. The world opens and moves from gray to polygons, to color, to pixel. The room is revealed. From a comfortable perspective of looking over one's shoulder, dashboard and controls pulse. Impatiently as I test audio, check frame rate, adjust interface and HUDs. It starts. Data flowing. Push those keys. Thankful for key binding and mouse driving. Adjust pressure. Reduce thrust. Close flaps. Count pallets. The data continues to flow. Time to allocate. Call out tactics. Move to the next station. Set up. Rinse. Repeat. Compile. Strategize in real time. Decide. Evaluate. Adjust. Next scene. File your forms. Bio break. The meat suit reminds us. Hand cramps. Forearms ache. Eyes dry. Why are my eyebrows so sweaty? Final test. Review the data, analysis, what went right, what went wrong. Does it scale? Where was the lag? Where was the hole? Did the alignment hold? What? It's been 3 hours? So I just sort of think of all the different immersion pieces that they've had, and I'll help Lear trying not to have to type all of that in the chat. So really what I sort of thought about is all the different pieces when they come to the different virtual environments I've been in, and moving from accounting simulations, looking at everything from gaming to also looking at, in my area, career and technology, looking at how we develop virtual environments to test skills that have repetitive tasks associated with them. So you're always resetting, you're always redoing, you're controlling how hard do you squeeze the trigger to change the flow of paint through a spray can. How do you pull, or how do you decide to dial in, zoom out? How do you move around and evaluate everything that's going on around us? And for me, that's really sort of one of the things that really gets me immersed, is this constant flow of data, and also the dashboards and the different areas to optimize, to look at, to allocate, and to arrange. And then, of course, at the end, it's the reporting that we all typically have to do in education, which is one of the holy grails we're trying to catch, or the silver bullets, is how do you create an immersive simulation or immersive environment, and then are able to pull out your assessment in a non-invasive manner. And that's one of the challenges that we see moving forward. And so I'll go ahead and turn it over to Lear.
Thank you, Chris. Well, the reason I picked this, and I just want everyone to realize that I'm a bit uncomfortable today wearing all this red, okay? Because those of you who know me know I go around in black quite often, and it's because it's very relaxing to the eyes, and I can focus on the beauty around me, right? So here I am in this red outfit with this red hat, and you're probably wondering, what is going on? Well, I'm trying to illustrate something called the Red Queen's Dilemma, okay? And if you're not familiar with it, and I can give you a link again, but there's this wonderful little saying from the Red Queen when she explains to Alice. She says, "It takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place." And of course, that's from the Looking Glass. But it's this notion that in education, we work so hard to educate folks, and we keep thinking, students keep thinking, I'll be done soon, and I'll be so done with school, and I'll never have to take another class or learn or do anything. And what they don't realize is nowadays you have to keep learning just to keep in the same place. So the dilemma is, how do we grow? How do we achieve new horizons? How do we feel inspired? Whether we're developer, designer, teacher, educator, app creator, or a person who just makes it all come alive, right? Each of us has the same burden. And we're plagued by a fire hose of information coming at us. And of course, we keep feeling like off with our head, if it lines from Alice in Wonderland. So the story that comes to mind to me is, why do we use this as a premise in our games, in our learning, in our teaching, in our ways of thinking? And how do we help students understand that they just have to keep growing and moving forward, that it's a continuum? And somehow, like the myth of Sisyphus, if you remember, where he's taken, I always forget if he's rolling a rock uphill or whether it's buckets of water with a hole in it, but in whichever myth you're working with, it feels like a struggle that you're not going to win. And so our challenge, and one of the stories that I look for, is how do we become winners, all of us, and empowered? Over to you, Barbara.
Thank you, Lear. My portion, I love all these topics, but I keep coming back to the importance of embodiment. And this is why I am such a champion of using avatars in virtual worlds that represent not just a character, but also a representation of self. Now, Kay mentioned the importance of attachment. And so many folks here had to create new avatars. And so, you have limitations on how well you can customize your avatar to be able to use it and feel that self-efficacy, to feel comfortable. Now, if you've been here year after year after year, you probably know, where to get resources and how to customize your avatar. But this is part of the argument of what I say to my colleagues, why virtual worlds are so special compared to other types of games where you have characters that you participate with. Because when we have the digital literacy to be able to change our appearance, not only in just, like a humanoid form, but also for other types of forms, when it really becomes unlimited, this is where I think the embodiment can really come in. At the end of these slides, we have some references for some journal articles that talk about different aspects. And I was trying to find at least one that would be one of the best articles. And really, this concept of embodiment, it really relates to artificial intelligence and how frequently, you have to have a robot that goes with the artificial intelligence, and the robot has to have some kind of body to be more real to people. But it also, other types of embodiment that include the somatic experience. I think, Lear, you're going to talk about that a little bit, but I can circle back to that thought as well. But this
go right ahead. Go right ahead. They may wonder what somatic experience means, and I'll type that.
Yeah, the somatic experience is your kind of your whole body. And so when I was doing my dissertation research, and I was trying to study, what are these people doing collaboratively, these professional groups, what are they doing in virtual worlds? How can I illustrate that? It became very clear to me that I couldn't look at the groups without looking at the individual. And so when I looked at the individual, I saw very quickly that you have 3 different aspects. And Andy Stricker, if he's still here, he helped me come up with a construct to explore this notion. I didn't do a very good job of collecting data relating to what it means, but the idea, the information that comes from you from the outside, that's exteroception. The data that's going on, the experience you have within you, that's interoception. And then your knowledge of where your body is in space is proprioception. And, it was funny, we were chatting beforehand, and we were joking about being able to multitask. And I said, please, no scissors. Well, I don't have very good proprioception in the physical world because I was born with a congenital defect in my toes. So that affects my balance. And frequently, I will run into things because I just I didn't get the distance right from how I thought where the dishwasher was when it was open. And so this can be very hazardous. But the notion for embodiment, where our avatars are in space, this is why, sometimes we get so concerned when we bump into new people who we don't know. And of course, us veterans, we bump into each other all the time. And it doesn't mean, it's okay. But as we get more ability to measure our somatic experience of what's going on with us, these are things like perspiration, your heart rate, your blood pressure, your and then other chemical levels in your body. How much cortisol do you have going on that's creating stress? How much serotonin do you have? How much endorphins do you have? One of the best things I've learned from working with you guys is the importance of being able to laugh. I'm so serious as a scholar. It's just, I have to laugh more with you all. And I really appreciate that.
No, I know. and Barbara, I know what you mean. I'm starting to get groomed in the form of a scholar, and the way they present is just different. They don't have fun.
And and it's great to be able to code shift, to say, oh no, I did my homework. I know the scholarship of this, and I've got the literature, and I know how to interpret it, and I can quote it and stand upon these giants that came before. But then I can also learn how to not take myself too seriously, and I can really start to explore, like what would happen if in this picture my avatar was this pod that I'm sitting in to be able to go fly around on Mars. So I hope you get a chance to look at some of that literature and that you think about the value of what we know now about what we're doing using as these avatars. But then also, as we get closer in the future, when we start having the data to be able to put together with the shapes of our avatars. We use this for example, in training, for example, firefighting. We have to have training for firefighters to go into very stressful simulated environments so that they can learn how to recover very quickly. And so and same with military training. So you want to be able to know how much stress you can induce that's useful for the training, but at what point does it not become useful in training? This is the kind of thing that this kind of research will involve.
And I was going to say, before we segue to our next section, I'm just going to jump back at a couple things. First of all, Barb, because you were, Delightful, because you were mentioning this, the somatic experience, I think that's really interesting, because what you were saying about knowing what was happening on the outside, I can tell you, because I do some augmented reality thing with students that have them doing mobile quests, and especially with Pokemon Go when it first came out, we were really worried about them being able to look at the screen and walk around. I mean, there were conversations that happened about that. And I'm gonna throw you such a softball. I'm gonna say now, and what about smart cities when we start seeing more of this?
Absolutely. Well, and it comes back to like what Chris is studying with data justice. Because we're going to have several sets of data. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have my own data that says, okay, in my avatar, I prefer my avatar to be the skin on the data store that represents my own learning, my own performance, my own health record, my own financial well-being, my own digital heritage. But then there'll be other organizations that are going to try and track me and what I am doing in those organizations. And so we're going to have to reconcile this type of data in the future.
I was going to say something really quick to Chris. Chris, while what you read was beautiful, do you want to tell the people the struggle you had with this idea of quantum storytelling, where you were going to tell a narrative rather than give us a bullet-pointed list of constraints and affordances?
Yes, as being a person from the business side of things and an administrator, I'm used to communicating in bullet points, and so this was an interesting piece. As you pull through the quantum storytelling literature, you start seeing that there's this whole concept of that quantum stories. There's a concept of spiraling. The idea is that you have the swirling ecosystem of stories, and together as a group, that's how we communicate, is through these individual anecdotes, through these individual checks in time or pieces of time, and how they relate. And traditionally, prior to moving into a quantum storytelling narrative, it was very linear. You always started at the beginning and you ended at the end. And really, when you start getting into the quantum storytelling piece, you start getting into the idea of the Doctor Who idea that time isn't a straight line; it is a squiggly line, and sometimes it goes back on itself and sets different things up. And if you've been watching The Good Place, it's the Jeremy Bearimy concept. That's from The Good Place. The idea that time isn't linear, that it moves all around and it goes through. And that's really sort of what they're applying here with the storytelling, is that you have all these little snippets of stories and all these little snippets of experiences, and together, as they move into and start forming, or as you go through your sense making, you start pulling out stories that are relevant to the individual, and with that you get your storyline, and that's not necessarily in a linear process. And so for me, I try to pull out these sort of little descriptors and adjectives and verbs and different things that were all pieces that engage me and immerse me in the variety of contexts that I've experienced over the last 10, 20 years, and trying to come up with a story or come up with a map that pulls through. And it's really cool because with quantum storytelling, you're going through it, and each of these little indicators is a story that can branch off into another storyline. So the whole idea behind quantum storytelling is that it gives you lots of flexibility in how you actually want to deliver your content.
And I want to end with Lear with giving us a wrap up of quantum storytelling, but I wanted to make a couple comments really quickly, because this was meant. It's a string that I was seeing weaving through what the Barbara Delightful was saying, and also what Chris was saying. Some things that he was saying, and I don't know if you guys picked them up, like embodiment versus meat suit. Okay. And the reason I'm pulling this up is, okay, are there any other people out there when you have no cognitive surplus left at night, and you can't even handle, like, saying building in world or playing a game, and all you can do is maybe and I'm going to admit this, maybe you're on your couch and you don't care if you fall asleep on your couch. Okay. so you might watch some Netflix. Okay, well, I will tell, this is my confessional. My Netflix thing right now is watching K-dramas and J-dramas. Anybody else out there watching Korean dramas or Japanese dramas? Okay, it's okay if you don't want to admit it. I'm just saying I use Chris's login, and Netflix now believes that he is an Asian 16-year-old girl. Okay,
that's what my data profile now says.
Okay, the reason I'm even mentioning this is there is a theme in a lot of these K-dramas or J-dramas. Not every one of them, but some of them. The thing of it is, there is this thing of switching bodies. And how fast can their friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, families, can they tell that it's them or not? So when you're talking about embodiment, when Barbara was talking about embodiment and Chris mentioned like meat suit, it just made me really think about how much we switch up our avatars and how that embodiment can really happen even if you don't change up anything about your avatar, that your friends or the people you spend time in world with know whether it's you or not.
We used to dress up at work for Halloween every year. Mm-hmm. And one year we had our theater department that had a sale on all these costumes. So I got my hands on one of these costumes. And so you really couldn't, I had a wig and I had glasses, I wore gloves, this whole outfit. I went to work all day and did not say a word. And by the end of the day, I was feeling pretty depressed because nobody knew who I was. Oh. And I was so used to all this friendliness, for interacting with all these people. and what I was saying for Lisa saying the delay in the moving and sounds, I completely understand. I always turn off. I always turn off the translation and I just read the words. And by now I can tell the differences in some languages, and I'm starting to get a 16-year-old girl vocabulary maybe in a couple of these languages. But what I just wanted to say was that there's this part, and like Barb just mentioned it, Our people know about what the inside is, whether the avatar or whether you're dressed up in a costume. That's how our people know us. And I just wanted to switch it over to Lear now, and whatever words of wisdom you have to wrap us up from this quantum storytelling part of it, for us to jump into the next session, which is where we're going to talk about deeper immersion.
Well, let's go ahead and jump into it. We have 20 minutes left.
Oh, okay. Never mind. Okay. Okay, Chris, I think you're up first.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and get kicked off. So since my area was looking a lot at the as-if side of things, one of the first things that you talk about when you start talking about immersion is today's hot articles. So the two recent articles that have popped out have been by Jeremy Bailenson, and he is the Stanford University Thomas More Stork Storkey, professor of communication and the founding director of the Virtual Human Interaction Lab. And his most recent research focuses on how virtual experiences can transform education, environmental conservation, empathy, and healing. And so his last two pieces, his newest two pieces, focus a lot on empathy. And the first one is what you see here was a study using VR in comparison to traditional perspective-taking tasks. So this would be like reading literature, watching a movie. How do you form or inform and then try to convey empathy or help develop empathy with an individual? And so what happened was a two-part study. One part was looking at short and long-term perspectives, and the other one was looking at more populational behavior and seeing what actually worked well doing at a large scale to work with it. So the idea for them was to put them into a VR sim, and then they also had a variety of other tests. I should say the first study was just a standard experimental controls build-up, where you had the experimental treatment was watching VR, and then the control was just basically reading literature about it, and they compared it to it. And really what they found was that immersive virtual environments resulted in a more positive, longer-lasting attitude towards homelessness, and significantly more signatures supporting helpful initiatives. So number one, they took a survey. They took basically a instrument that would go ahead and capture empathy, and they would pull that out, and they would go ahead and look at actually does that translate into action, and they would look at did they sign off on initiatives or petitions to help improve the condition of those that were in a homeless situation. And so this went through, the first study was an 8-week trial. The next part was a 4-week trial they followed up on. And really what they found was that by going into VR, that using immersive environments for a perspective-taking task came out as it may be more effective. Kind of like, of course, number of research, you can't come out and say, yes, it was definitely more effective. Maybe more effective at improving attitudes towards specific social targets and motivating pro-social behaviors in the form of signed petitions in support of helpful initiatives than traditional or less immersive perspective-taking tasks. So the idea is that by using immersive environments, you build that empathy. You put them in the other person's shoes, for lack of a better, more eloquent way of stating it, and that they go ahead and that resonates with the people who went through that treatment and experienced the immersive, and it resonated more strongly with them when it came to number one, the post assessment on their empathy to the issue, and then also on their how they actually went to translate it into action in social reform. So the next one is not necessarily as heavy, but as homelessness. But the next one is looking at field trips. So the second paper looked at how does field trips work when it comes to teaching things such as climate change. And this particular experiment was looking at ocean acidification. And so the title of this one was Immersive Virtual Reality Field Trips, Facilitating Learning About Climate Change. And so this paper went ahead and looked at 4 different studies, 2 lab-controlled experiments, 2 field studies. And what happened was, again, same general conclusion. After immersive VR experience, people report positive knowledge gain or an interest in learning about the cause and effects of ocean acidification. And that participants who explored, traveled, and found, in other words, people who engaged more in the immersive environment actually had a greater change when they looked at the pre and post test scoring about climate change. So engagement, the more immersion, they got comfortable, they moved around, they interacted with their environment, they looked around, they found the various different pieces, they explored, went longer, spent more time in the environment, they demonstrated a greater gain in knowledge when it came to those pre and post test scores. And we'll go ahead and feel free to ask questions, and I'll respond in chat, and I'll turn it over to Barbara to talk about embodiment.
Oh boy, here we are again.
There seems to be a theme here.
Yeah, I think you're the subject matter expert on this for us, okay?
Actually, yeah, there was just a little bit more that I wanted to mention about this, because it relates to that identity again. And so, and these lovely pictures that are resing here are showing, the Tulane colloquium that occurred last week. And then that was a similar build from the Federal Consortium of Virtual Worlds, and how each week, Cynthia, Lobo, and Spinoza, Andy Stricker, we all get together and we continue this kind of study of all these different types of aspects that make up the ecology and the ecosystem of these environments that create the magic. But concerning identity, there was one study that some researchers in the University of, I think it was Lancashire, where I think it was 2011, it's in the resources at the end, but they were talking about this concept of supermorphia. And the idea was looking at how your identity forms from whether you take more of your experience in the physical world and you bring that into the virtual world, and it impacts your avatar expression, your interactions, and so on, or whether you have more exposure in the virtual world and that informs more of your physical identity development. So I think that's just a fascinating area of study for the use of avatars. Especially where people learn to take control and take charge and have that digital literacy skills to be able to express what they look like or what they are. Scripting, properties that go on with the different characteristics of the avatars. But there was also, in the same article, there was another notion, and very important, difference between ideal self and idealized self. So a lot of people talk about, being too exposed in these worlds, that it's escapism, that not dealing with reality in the physical world, and it's unhealthy. And of course, many of us know the exact opposite can be true. We can actually take much better care of ourselves because we have better support systems. We've got more, we have more experts and mentors who we can collaborate with. We can get inspiration almost on demand when needed. But this notion of ideal self is more aspirational. How can I be the best me? Versus the idealized self. There is pressure on me to be something that's expected, whether that expectation comes from me or whether it comes from my peers, maybe it's from my job, my boss, whomever. So this is where I think the power of avatars and the power of embodiment come into play. And, there is a concern of not having enough diversity in your personal learning network. You have people who do not disagree with you enough, who do not challenge you enough, who everybody has the same philosophy or the same, opinions. That's not healthy. But the idea that we are able to learn how to self-regulate with this embodiment, with the additional information we get about ourselves. Very powerful ideas, especially for storytelling, our own digital heritage. Thank you. And there we are. And hey, we were talking about starting a little bit before this session. We were talking about watching reruns on Netflix. Guess what that is? Cynthia, you want to say what that is?
She's up.
Oh yeah. I was typing away. I love this shot because while our simulation was focused on reality, we even looked at a model that goes way beyond our galaxy, our notion of the universe, something that NASA came up with. It's highly mathematical, and we had a physical way of representing it. We brought it into the virtual world. And next thing I know, Andy started adding some of these wonderful, fanciful pieces. And of course, this is from Stargate, but I also like the Anubiseths from World of Warcraft too. So of course I had to take a photo. I'm the photographer of the group, right? And what I find amazing is that we can blend fiction and reality. That we can have this playful element even while we're doing busy, purposeful things, while we're trying to advance the state of research and understand learning in so many ways. And these kinds of spaces inspire us. They make us come alive, and they cause us to dream. That's all I want to say about that. But I have deep immersion next, so if you'd skip to the next slide, please. Okay, well here we are. This is a little piece of our game. And you remember Andy said we had 7 levels. And when I think of deep immersion from my perspective, I have to admit, when I put on the spacesuit and when I'm out in Mars and we're going through these areas and we're about to work with this device that will cause the planet to transform, to become breathable, if you will. That's one of the stages in the game. And of course, we're working with all these different pieces, and I look out at the dreamscape behind us, what we're hoping to have happen. And then I look at the plan over to the right or left, and I look at my colleagues, my partners, the people who inspire me. We get together and do this each week, and we're volunteers. We're doing it out of our passion. And I think this is an expression of the passion each of you feel when you create, when you work on OpenSim as a developer, when you even when you ask for changes and for things, you stimulate great ideas in us. And of course, we need you. So when I think of the community conference, I think of deep immersion. I think of us being in this space right now, and I think of where we're going in the future. And I just love this. I took this photo, and every time we go here on Sundays, I just feel like I'm in a magical space. I think there's another image. Yes, there is. This one here, it's mine also. You see it says the microcosm on the bottom, right? And of course, we have these pods that we can fly on the planet, and we can also fly them from a spaceport up above. So we have different dimensions on how we move and how we interact with the content. And I know in virtual worlds we become a little jaded, don't we? We get used to things that move, and we kind of take them for granted. And of course I don't, because I'm really fascinated with everything that happens. Do you know, in 1995, when I was creating my first virtual environment, I had to do the vector geometry. I had to do the wireframing. I know it sounds like someone who says they went to school walking uphill 6 miles in the snow, right? But it wasn't easy. We had to calculate the collisions, and we had to do all this stuff that would take a long time to get any object working. And so today, do you know, when I res a prim on the ground, it feels like magic. There's a sense of wonder that I experience. Now, much of what you see around us right here is mesh, right? We are using other tools and bringing them in, but we're doing this partly to optimize the environment so that players get a really fine experience, especially when you cram it with a ton of content. And of course, we needed 5 grids. We have so much content, right? So we had to start architecting it differently. But immersion, to me, deep immersion, is when I put on these outfits and when I'm standing in this space, boy, I feel cocky. You know, I feel like I'm in charge and in control and know what I'm doing. But in real life, I'm just as uncertain and just as inquisitive and unsure of myself as the next person, right? You know, it makes no difference how much experience you have. You know, there's still this sense of wonder, and we still learn so much from each other. Over to you.
Okay, and we're getting close to wrapping it up. But the other thing that I wanted to bring in was, now, there's a couple terms you might have heard out there. While I'm going to be talking about third space, I just wanted to throw out, there's another concept out there called third place. And third place is, just think of this TV sitcom Cheers, where everybody knows your name. That's what considered the third place is. Okay? So a lot of our places in virtual worlds and games are definitely third places. But this totally, and I didn't know that Lear was going to set me up so well by what she was just talking about, because what I'm going to mention really quickly, and this is just something for people to think about and think about how we do stories around this and research and everything else, is the third space. Now, the third space is, at least in the PhD program that I'm doing, is this really hard space for people to conceptualize. And the reason why is it's because it involves people who feel powerful and people who feel disenfranchised, or the subaltern, or the people who don't have a voice and can't do as much. That the third space is the place where both of these groups can negotiate a different kind of, if you want to be really optimistic, a different kind of world or a different kind of space. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up here is because that's the opportunity we really have in virtual worlds and virtual spaces, building this. And the reason I'm mentioning this, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, and yes, I used something that was been overused, but what I'm saying is that most of us here already understand this. I will tell you, while in my PhD program, with a bunch of other educators from across my state, they don't think this third space is possible. Or if it is possible, it's going to be really limited, and it's going to be really difficult. And I think we're doing this so much that we have to get our stories out of doing this, because otherwise people won't believe it's possible. And these third spaces, they could then play into things like smart cities and mixed reality and augmented reality. But just think, if you were even in a physical place, if you walk down a city street, and what if there was that other world you could pull up on your phone that made the place less scary, that made the place more familiar, that made the place feel like you belong to it. So what we do here, I think we need to talk about a lot, and we definitely need to bring it out there. Because I will tell you, the people in urban education, the people in critical theories in education, they're holding on. They have hope. I found out they have a lot of hope, but telling what we're doing could even give them more, which I think is exceptional for the world and for our students. I'm just going to end really quickly here. I'm going to let Chris and I are going to tell you about a couple of the spaces that if you want to come and join us at any time, and then Lear and Barbara will too, and then we'll just wrap it up. So Chris, you talk.
Sure. So one of the first things we have coming up is looking at the Metagame Book Club, and we are that's the website I just posted into the chat. And this is a group, this is a virtual book club, so we all read it. It goes over a course of 3 to 4 weeks, and then we have Google Hangout on Air sessions where we talk about the book and go through a variety of different discussions on it. And we also have used Reddit, we've used Google+, we've used a lot of different formats for the discussion piece to it, but it's a great way to look at books and trying to figure out which books you want to look at. And Kay just posted a link to the survey, so if you'd like to promote a book, feel free to go for it and let us know using that survey. We did use a term called lit RPG, which we found many people are not necessarily familiar with. It's a new genre of writing, and for those of you that like role play, this is also would sound very familiar to you. So I've just posted those links there, and then the other piece that's there is looking at future research. And Kay can talk a little bit about a new journal.
Okay, I will, and if you can put, Chris, you can put the links up, that'd be great. And while Chris nonchalantly says, "Oh yeah, and we have this book club," I will tell you, we get into these hour-longs worth of discussions about different aspects of the book, and we normally try to be bleeding edge. Doing and incorporating, like, it's not like we read a book. We read a book, and then there's 5 research articles that we decide to do there, and then there's 3 different movies we all feel we should watch so that we can discuss it, and so it's more like, you can choose how much you want to immerse into the book club, but if you want to treat it like a graduate level seminar, we're there for you. Okay. The other thing I was going to say really quick is and we're looking to do additional research if anybody else is interested in more with immersion. The other thing is that we're part of a group in our state that, and I should say, part of a group. Chris is the book review editor. Barbara and Leah are on the editorial board. So we're all involved. We on the digital commons, we just started a new journal. Our first issue is going up in April. It is going to be more on fake. We're putting a focus, but then you can submit anything else you'd like. The focus is fake news for this first one. The one coming up after that, Chris, you're going to definitely have some of the science fiction books as you're going to ask people to review those books so that they can get a broader audience when it comes to education and designers. So this is what we're doing, and I think we're almost out of time, except to put it to Lear and Barbara and anything they want to talk about.
Well, speaking of literature, and thanks for the opportunity to be able to participate in that journal. It was brought up earlier that, it's great to be able to create these environments. It's great to be able to experience them. But if you really want to influence higher education, you're going to have to publish. And unfortunately, that doesn't include, the regions that we're sitting in at this time. Maybe in the future we'll be able to get more richer media in our publications. But think about, when we're able to do collaborative transdisciplinary research in these environments, not just sharing what we have been researching outside the environments, but we're actually using the environments as well, the data inside the environments. So that's going to add up to a lot more interesting dimensions, I think, that we can share. Very exciting.
And on that note, it's a wrap. No, are there any questions for us? Step back into the old moderator spot. And do you have any final comments, Kay and Chris, while we're gathering questions from the audience?
Yeah, I wanted to say, Barbara, it's our journal. So if we want to try and do something, just put your thinking cap on. Or anybody else, if we want to try it, the University of Denver is very nice at giving us that space on digital commons, so that we have credibility.
Sure.
And the other thing I was going to say, you're absolutely right, and I knew I was going to say this quickly because I took a note on it. The reason why Chris covered those two articles by Bailenson, I will tell you, it's nothing we don't know already, okay? It's nothing we don't know already, but there are now two articles now that we can point to. Any naysayer who has problems with it or says, well, I don't know, is that evidence-based? And those two articles are very important because you can cite them.
Terrific. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank Kay, Abacus, Barbara, and myself, for a terrific presentation.